Well, I know I've talked a lot about why I'm so against punishment, but I really wanted to boil it down into three reasons why I am so against the use of punishment with kids. So let's dig in. Hi out there, this is Dr. Brett Pearce, child psychologist, and I'm not entirely sure that I know why I've started snapping in the intro of my videos, but you know what? I'm kind of a psych diva. Let's admit it. So let's talk a little bit about punishment. I have spent a lot of time on this channel ranting and raving about why it is such a terrible idea with kids when it comes to successful behavior management and when it comes to successfully navigating emotional and mental health challenges. And I'm so against the use of punishment because it is basically universally associated with, or at least nearly universally associated with, negative outcomes for kids in research. And it's also certainly true in terms of just practical applications with individual kids. And as far as I see it, there are three big reasons why punishment is such a bad idea. And yes, I do believe that punishment is such a bad idea that I believe that in many cases, probably most, it can simply be omitted with a lot of positive benefit from that omission. Now, I certainly don't believe in adopting this kind of like, oh, let's just sing Kumbaya and be nice and positive and everything will be okay. No, I certainly believe in appropriate kinds of guidance, confrontation, interventions, and limits when it comes to handling kids. But in my practice as a psychologist, which has included consulting with other professionals, providing certain kinds of leadership at agencies, seeing lots of kids and families myself, thousands in fact, I have really encountered the overwhelming, consistent difficulty that we are running into problems with just doing a lot of punishment. That usually seems to be the rule for when we're struggling with this issue. And in some cases, it's more like we're not implementing any limits at all. So I digress. Reason number one for my objection to punishment and why I feel it's such a bad idea is that punishment really only hurts, which is to say it hurts and makes kids angry. That makes simple logical sense. Like, when was the last time you were punished for something, even if you kind of did something wrong, and it made you feel happy, it made you wisely learn and grow, and it helped you kind of avoid resent towards whatever person was doing the punishing. Now, again, those things can happen even when we're setting, Dr. Pearce approved limits and things like that. Of course, that can happen, but it's remarkably different when we are truly just trying to inflict negative, like an aversive, which is to say something kind of painful or undesirable, just for the purposes of just punishing and kind of getting back at, or disciplining, as most people say it, although the origin of the word discipline was to teach, and teach and punish are not synonyms as far as I am concerned. Punishment just hurts, and it breeds a lot of anger and resentment. We've seen that in research, and you can see it in practice, I promise you. And the last time I checked, when we're dealing with a kiddo who is struggling with a lot of misbehaviors and painful feelings and things like that, making them more angry, it just does not seem to be a great way to go. Objection number two is that punishment really only serves, like, it can affect behavior. It's not really associated with positive outcomes per se, but that's not to say that it doesn't affect behavior. The ways in which it affects behavior tends to be about suppression of behavior rather than real behavioral change. So who here has ever dealt with a situation where they were implementing a punishment for an undesired behavior for a kid, only to find that that kid was finding ways of being more sneaky or kind of getting around the rule, things like that? And that's because it just suppresses behavior. It doesn't really teach needed lessons. And that's because, again, we're back into the same boat of just kind of angering or engendering resentment, which can then kind of foster this like, fine, I will figure out how to get this done. And now I'm really going to do it because I'm going to show you, because you were trying to show me with that punishment. And I believe it was psychologist Alfred Adler, who talked about vengeance as being an important motivating issue even in family relationships, which might sound really scary, like vengeance, like what are you talking about? But it's true. I mean, we human beings have an instinct, and it's actually a very good survival instinct, to kind of jump into action, to kind of lash out and to control when we're in pain and feeling angry. And what happens all too often in these situations is that punishment gets called a sort of disciplinary strategy, or something that's even a kind of moral imperative so that we can shape a kid's behavior in the right direction. But what it really is on the inside, frankly, for everyone involved in this dance, is it's just a vengeance transaction. It's just okay, who's bigger and stronger and can do the biggest kind of vengeance is going to win in this situation. And the last time I checked, that's not a terribly productive way of dealing with learning and growing, which is what we really want when we've got a kid who is struggling. Number 3, and this is a little bit more of an intimate one, and it's probably one that's hard to hear, but the frank truth is that punishment teaches kids to associate their painful feelings with more painful things to come. Which is to say, childhood misbehaviors are very commonly and almost universally, particularly when we're talking about real significant, real persistent childhood misbehaviors, they are connected with painful feelings. Happy kids don't misbehave much, but kids who are sad, angry, lonely, traumatized, feel ashamed of themselves, etc., those sorts of kids can and often do have a lot of associated misbehaviors that are driven by that pain. And imagine what it would be like to be in pain, to be struggling with that in a way that in your heart you know is not going well, and then to have that be punished, which is to say more pain is inflicted on you, especially by people you love and trust. And so what happens is we kind of create this sort of exponential thing going on with pain, where my pain gets associated with more pain, and it just creates a kind of downward spiral, where then the kiddo goes, okay, my painful feelings are triggered. Like, by way of example, let's say if we had a kid who's maybe experiencing some depression, and what happens is the kiddo kind of like maybe gets sad and grouchy and kind of lashes out at a peer at school. Now, I'm not saying that should just be, ignored and la-di-da and everything will be fine if we just ignore it or something. But if all we do is respond with a punishment, then the kiddo goes, okay, so now when I'm sad and depressed and I'm struggling and I'm irritable, now I'm just going to get in trouble for that, right? And so that's not going to help the kid regulate his feelings. It's not going to help kiddo deal with the depression. And in fact, in my view, it actually acts as an active exacerbating factor. It actively makes things worse without really providing a lot of clear benefit. And in fact, in the primary attachment situation, to sound a little academic, punishment tends to, particularly when it's used a lot, it tends to start to encourage kids to associate the primary attachment situation with a lot of pain, which is not a good thing in the long run. So, is my intention to scare people and panic them about punishment? Well, no, not exactly, but certainly to cast a big question mark and a lot of doubt on the subject, because the usual thing that I've run into, at least in United States culture, certain branches of it, is that we tend to rely on punishment a lot. In fact, I've encountered a lot of situations where it basically seems to be about the only tool in the toolbox for many adults. And really, I think for our culture, is that we seem to have this as the only tool that we know about with kids, which is to say to punish and reward them. And even then, the use of rewards, which is a lot better idea than punishments, but it still can be tied with a lot of punitive behavior. What do I mean by that? Well, here's one example. Cell phones. They're very, very, very desirable. They're really high value objects these days. And if I can give that and take it away from you at my whim, tell me that's not something that can easily turn into something punitive and can be associated with a lot of kind of negative feelings like, oh, why is it that it's being taken away from me, or am I going to get it back, and things like that. So the bottom line is punishment is not a good idea. It's not a good idea in my maybe humble opinion. I'm not so sure it's so humble, but it's not good according to research. And we're talking about decades long of research. I mean, we've even gotten so deep with this research that we're starting to talk about like the difference between kind of harsh and non-harsh punishments and things like that. And at least some of the research that I've recently reviewed, and it's been quite a few studies because I'm writing on the subject in a book that I've been working on slowly, we have found very consistently that even sort of appropriate punishments, by way of comparison to things that most people would kind of agree are too harsh and too kind of intense, that even appropriate punishments just don't seem to be associated with positive outcomes when it comes to changing kids' behavior for the better. So in my view, I guess to say, punishments really don't provide much in the way of benefit, and they do a lot of clear harm. So that is why I am so against them, and I just thought it was important to boil all this down in one focused video. And I'll probably be talking about this a lot in the future, just because if there is one thing that I feel like I would want to do as a child psychologist, it would be to get us adults to really let go the predominance of punishment as an approach to kids, because I really do think it's that big of a problem. It's possible that I'm wrong, but I doubt it. So at any rate, thank you for listening. This is Dr. Brett Pearce coming at you with another Dr. Pearce Gets on a Soapbox About Punishment video. Thanks for listening. And do consider subscribing if you found this video to be of use. Also consider giving me a thumbs up. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. This is Dr. Pearce signing off.